The people of Israel had journeyed far since the night of their deliverance from Egypt. By God's hand, they had been led out from the land of slavery, shielded by His mighty power. They had seen the waters of the Red Sea divide before them, walls of liquid rising on either side as they crossed on dry ground. Behind them, they had watched those same waters crash down on Pharaoh's army, sweeping away chariots and horsemen in a single moment. The people had lifted their voices in song, praising the Lord who had triumphed gloriously. Their journey through the wilderness had been filled with both testing and provision. When thirst pressed against their lips, God gave them water from a rock. When hunger gnawed at their stomachs, bread from heaven rained down each morning, and quail covered the camp in the evening. By fire at night and cloud by day, the Lord went before them, never leaving, never forsaking. Yet, even with such wonders behind them, they had not yet reached their destination. God was leading them to something greater. At last, their journey brought them to the wilderness at the foot of Mount Sinai. It was a place unlike any other, silent and solemn, the mountain rising high and steep above them. Its rocky slopes caught the light of the desert sun, and its peak seemed to touch the sky itself. To the people, it was not just a mountain, but a place set apart, filled with mystery. For it was here that the God who had rescued them would bind them to Himself in covenant. The people made camp at the base, their tents stretching across the plain. Yet there was unease in the air. The elders and leaders could sense that this was no ordinary resting place. Moses ascended the slopes, disappearing into the heights, and the people waited. Days passed, and when he returned, his face was grave, his words heavy with warning. The Lord was about to descend in the sight of all. The people must prepare themselves, wash their garments, and consecrate themselves, for on the third day God would appear upon the mountain. No one was to touch it, for it was holy ground. Even an animal that brushed its side would die. The people obeyed, their hearts trembling with expectation. On the morning of the third day, the sky darkened though the sun had risen. A thick cloud settled over the summit, rolling downward like smoke from a great furnace. Lightning split the heavens, and thunder roared so fiercely that the ground beneath their feet shook. Then came the sound of a trumpet, faint at first, but growing louder and louder, until its blast filled the camp. Men, women, and children poured from their tents, their faces pale with awe and fear, as Moses led them out to meet God at the base of the mountain. The scene before them was like nothing they had ever known. The entire mountain quaked violently. Flames licked its sides, and smoke billowed upward, twisting into the heavens. The trumpet sounded again, louder still, and the people trembled, covering their ears. Their hearts pounded with dread, for they knew they stood in the presence of the Almighty. Then the Lord descended upon the mountain in fire, and His voice thundered. The people shrank back, terrified. They turned to Moses, crying out, "You speak to us, and we will listen. But do not let God speak directly to us, or we will die." Moses, though his own frame shook with the weight of the moment, answered them with calm steadiness. "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of Him may be before you, that you may not sin." Yet the people stood far off, unable to draw nearer. Their eyes were fixed on the smoking mountain, their ears filled with the sound of thunder and trumpet blasts. Moses alone approached the thick darkness where God was, called by the Lord Himself. It was there, within the cloud, that God would speak, not with the whispers of men, but with His own voice, not with suggestions, but with commandments. At Sinai, the people of Israel were about to be given a law that revealed God's holiness, His justice, and His desire for His chosen nation to walk in His ways. And so, trembling at the foot of the mountain, Israel waited. The God who had freed his people was about to show them how to live as his own. The mountain still trembled as Moses stood within the thick cloud. The air was heavy with smoke and fire, and yet he was not consumed. For here in the darkness, the voice of the Lord broke forth, not in whispers, but in words of power and command. These were not human instructions. They were the very foundation of the covenant, spoken by the Creator himself. And God said, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." The people below could hear the voice, and it filled them with trembling. Every word struck their hearts like thunder. Each command revealed not only what they must do, but who their God was. He was not distant. He was the one who had redeemed them, who had broken the chains of slavery, who had called them his own. The first commandment came, "You shall have no other gods before me." The people had seen the false gods of Egypt, carved from stone and wood, worshipped with rituals and blood. They had seen how powerless those gods were before the mighty acts of the Lord. Now he declared that none could stand beside him. His people were to worship him alone, for he is the living God, jealous for their devotion and love. The second commandment followed. "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For the first, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments." The people stirred uneasily. They had seen idols everywhere in their journey, but here God made it clear. He was not to be shaped into any form of man or beast. His glory could not be captured in images. He alone was holy, and he alone was to be served. Then the third commandment, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. For the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." The very name of God was holy. It was not to be used lightly, nor mixed with falsehood. His name carried weight, power, and holiness, and his people were to honor it with reverence. The fourth commandment followed, and it spoke of rest. "Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your servant, nor your cattle, nor the stranger within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." Here God reminded them that rest was not only a gift, but a command. Just as he had rested from creation, so his people must set apart one day in 7, a day of worship and renewal, a day holy to the Lord. As the words thundered from the mountain, the people trembled, clutching their garments. Their children pressed close to them. They had never heard such things before. These were not merely rules. These were the foundations of a new life with God. The voice did not stop. For what had begun with commandments toward God would now turn toward commandments about how to live with one another. The covenant was being written, not yet in stone, but in fire, in thunder, and in the trembling hearts of all who stood before Sinai. The mountain shook, fire and cloud still cloaking the summit, and the voice of God continued to thunder across the wilderness. The first 4 commandments had set before the people the holiness of their God, showing them how they were to worship him, honor his name, and rest in his presence. But the Lord's covenant did not stop with devotion toward him alone. His people were also called to walk in righteousness toward one another. The voice of the Lord declared, "Honor your father and your mother," that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God is giving you." The people listened. This commandment bound generations together. Respect and obedience to parents was not a light matter, for in the family structure God had placed order, care, and instruction. To dishonor one's parents was to dishonor the Lord who had given them. To honor them, however, was to walk in the way of blessing. Then the voice of God spoke again with great power. "You shall not murder." The words pierced the heart. Life was sacred, created in the image of God. To take life unjustly was to defy the Creator himself. This command reminded Israel that every person bore worth, not because of status or strength, but because they were fashioned by the hands of the Almighty. The seventh commandment followed, "You shall not commit adultery." Here the Lord guarded marriage, the covenant between husband and wife. Fidelity was not merely a social bond, but a reflection of God's own faithfulness. To betray that bond was to strike at the very heart of trust and purity within the family. Then the Lord said, "You shall not steal." The people knew theft from Egypt, where masters took freely from slaves. But here God declared that his people were to respect what belonged to others. They were to live not by covetousness or greed, but by honesty and labor. The ninth commandment resounded, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." Words themselves were placed under command. Lies, slander, and false testimony could destroy reputations, harm families, and bring injustice. God's people were called to truth, for he is a God of truth, and deceit had no place among them. Finally, the Lord gave the 10th commandment. "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." The people grew still. This command reached deep into the secret places of the heart. It was not only outward acts that God saw, but inward desires. Greed, envy, and longing for what belonged to another were forbidden. Contentment and gratitude were to rule the heart of God's people. 10 commandments had now been spoken, each one resounding like thunder, each one cutting into the soul. Together they formed a complete vision of life, honor toward God, respect toward others, and purity of heart. This was not a list of customs or traditions. This was the holy law of the Lord, spoken by his own voice. The mountain still smoked, and the trumpets still blared, when the people could endure no more. Their fear overflowed, and they stood trembling, unable to look up toward the fire that crowned Sinai. With voices filled with dread, they cried again to Moses, "You speak to us, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us, or we will die." The weight of holiness was too much for them to bear. They had witnessed miracles, but this moment was beyond all. God's voice had reached into the very marrow of their bones. Moses turned to them and said, "Do not be afraid, for God has come to test you, that his fear may be before you, that you may not sin." Still, the people kept their distance, trembling and afraid. Only Moses went forward into the thick darkness where the Lord was. There, in the cloud and fire, he would remain, receiving from God the law that would be written not only upon stone tablets, but upon the very identity of Israel. The air at the foot of Mount Sinai still trembled with awe. The smoke had not yet lifted, and the echoes of thunder still seemed to linger in the hearts of the people. They had heard the voice of God. They had seen fire touch the mountain. They had been warned not to draw near lest they perish. And in their fear, they had begged Moses to be their mediator, to stand between them and the Almighty. So it was that Moses entered the thick darkness, drawn not by boldness of his own, but by the call of the Lord. There, away from the trembling multitude, God spoke to him further. The Lord gave instructions about altars and worship, about how the people were to honor him, not with idols or images, but with purity of heart and sacrifice that acknowledged his holiness. When Moses came down and told the people all the words of the Lord, they lifted their voices together in unison and said, "All the words which the Lord has spoken, we will do." Their voices rose across the camp like a mighty chorus. The people had heard the covenant spoken, and they pledged themselves to obedience. Early the next morning, Moses built an altar at the foot of the mountain, with 12 pillars to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Young men offered burnt offerings and peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and the other half he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it aloud in the hearing of the people. Once again they cried, "All that the Lord has said we will do, and be obedient." Then Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you, according to all these words." Thus the covenant was sealed, not in silence, but with sacrifice, with blood, and with the promise of obedience. After this, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel went up and beheld God. Under his feet was something like a pavement of sapphire, clear as the heavens themselves. Though they saw God, he did not strike them down. Instead, they ate and drank in his presence, a holy fellowship between heaven and earth. But soon the Lord called Moses higher still. "Come up to me on the mountain, and be there. And I will give you tablets of stone, and the law and commandments which I have written, that you may teach them." So Moses rose with Joshua his assistant, and together they climbed the slopes. To the elders he said, "Wait here for us until we come back to you. Indeed, Aaron and Hur are with you. If any man has a difficulty, let him go to them." Then Moses went up into the cloud that covered Sinai. For 6 days the cloud rested upon the mountain, and the glory of the Lord appeared like a consuming fire in the sight of the children of Israel. On the 7th day God called to Moses from within the cloud. Moses entered the midst of it and went up into the mountain, where he remained for 40 days and 40 nights. There, in the holy fire and cloud, God would give him the tablets of stone, written with the very finger of God. The law that had been thundered aloud would now be inscribed in lasting form. It was not a temporary word nor a fleeting sound, but a covenant carved into stone, eternal and unchanging, to guide his people in every generation. At the foot of Sinai, the people watched the mountain blaze with fire, the cloud covering its heights. To them, it was as if Moses had been swallowed by the very presence of God. They could not know all that was being spoken in the heights, but they knew this: the covenant had been confirmed, and their lives would never be the same. High upon Mount Sinai, Moses remained in the cloud of God's presence. Days turned to weeks, and the Lord spoke with him continually, giving him commandments and instructions for his people. He revealed the design of the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the priesthood, and the holy offerings. Each word was precise, filled with meaning, for God was teaching Israel how he would dwell among them. At last, the Lord gave Moses 2 tablets of stone, written with his own finger. Upon them were engraved the 10 Commandments, the very words that had thundered from the mountain. These tablets were not the work of men. They were the eternal covenant in stone, unchanging and holy. Yet, even as Moses received the law, the people at the foot of Sinai began to stumble. 40 days had passed, and they grew restless. Their leader was gone, hidden in the smoke and fire. Fear and impatience began to stir. They turned to Aaron, saying, "Come, make us gods that shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron faltered under the weight of their demand. He told them to bring their gold earrings, and they did, melting them down and shaping them into a calf. When the image was finished, the people cried out, "This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt." They built an altar before it, and Aaron proclaimed a feast. The next day, the people offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, then sat down to eat and drink, rising up to play in wild revelry. Their shouts of celebration rose up from the camp, echoing against the mountain. It was a sound of betrayal, of hearts turning from the living God to an image of gold. On the mountain, the Lord spoke to Moses. "Go, get down, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded calf, and worshipped it, and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of Egypt.' The Lord's anger burned hot, and he said, 'I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people. Now, therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn against them, and I may consume them. And I will make of you a great nation.' But Moses pleaded before the Lord, 'Why does your wrath burn hot against your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak and say, "He brought them out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth"? Turn from your fierce wrath, and relent from this harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by yourself, saying, "I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and all this land I have spoken of I give to them." The Lord listened to Moses, and in mercy he relented from destroying his people. With the tablets of stone in his hands, Moses descended the mountain. As he came near the camp, Joshua, who had waited partway up the slopes, heard the noise and said, "There is a sound of war in the camp." But Moses answered, "It is not the sound of victory, nor the sound of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear." When they reached the camp, Moses saw the calf and the dancing. His anger burned, and in anguish he cast the tablets down, breaking them at the foot of the mountain. The covenant, freshly engraved by God's own hand, shattered before their eyes. Moses took the golden calf, burned it with fire, ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the people drink it. Then he turned to Aaron with a voice heavy with grief and wrath. "What did this people do to you, that you have brought so great a sin upon them?" Aaron faltered, "Do not let the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, that they are set on evil. They said to me, 'Make us gods that shall go before us.' So I said to them, 'Whoever has any gold, let them break it off.' They gave it to me, and I cast it into the fire, and this calf came out. But the damage was done. The people had turned from God, even as his law was being written for them. Holiness had been revealed, but rebellion had risen up in their hearts. The covenant was broken before it had even been embraced. The camp of Israel lay in silence after the judgment of the golden calf. What had begun as wild revelry had ended in fear, sorrow, and shame. The people knew they had sinned greatly against the Lord, and his wrath had nearly consumed them. The tablets of the covenant were shattered at their feet. The fire of the mountain had been exchanged for the fire of their rebellion. Moses, grieved in heart, turned again to seek the Lord. He knew the people could not survive without God's mercy. Going back up the mountain, he prayed, "Oh, these people have committed a great sin, and have made for themselves a god of gold. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, but, if not, blot me, I pray, out of your book which you have written." The Lord answered, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. Now therefore, go, lead the people to the place of which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, In the day when I visit for punishment, I will visit punishment upon them for their sin. Though the Lord relented from destroying the entire nation, his presence was withdrawn from the camp. He said to Moses, "Depart and go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt, to the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will send my angel before you. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, for I will not go up in your midst, lest I consume you on the way. For you are a stiff-necked people." When the people heard these words, they mourned. They took off their ornaments in sorrow, and the camp was heavy with grief. What good was a promised land if God's presence was not among them? Moses, desperate for assurance, pitched a tent outside the camp and called it the tent of meeting. Whenever he entered it, the pillar of cloud would descend, and the Lord would speak with him as a man speaks with his friend. From there, Moses pleaded with God, saying, "See, you say to me, 'Bring up this people,' but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, 'I know you by name,' and you have found grace in my sight. Now therefore, I pray, if I have found grace in your sight, show me now your way, that I may know you, and that I may find grace in your sight. Consider that this nation is your people." The Lord answered with words of hope, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Still Moses pressed further. "If your presence does not go with us, do not bring us up from here. For how then will it be known that your people and I have found grace in your sight, except you go with us? So we shall be separate, your people and I, from all the people who are upon the face of the earth." The Lord said to Moses, "I will also do this thing that you have spoken, for you have found grace in my sight, and I know you by name." Emboldened, Moses asked for more than guidance. He longed to see the glory of God. "Please, show me your glory." The Lord answered, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live." So the Lord placed Moses in the cleft of a rock, covering him with his hand as his glory passed by. Moses was allowed to see only the back of the Lord's presence, not his face, but even that glimpse was enough to strengthen him. The next morning, the Lord commanded Moses to cut 2 new tablets of stone. Once again he ascended Mount Sinai, carrying them in his hands. There the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him, proclaiming his name. The Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but by no means clearing the guilty. Moses bowed his head and worshipped. He prayed, "If now I have found grace in your sight, O Lord, let my Lord, I pray, go among us, even though we are a stiff-necked people. Pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us as your inheritance." And the Lord renewed his covenant. Once again his people were bound to him, not because of their faithfulness, but because of his mercy. Morning broke over the wilderness, and the light of the rising sun touched the summit of Mount Sinai. Moses had been in the presence of God for 40 days and 40 nights, sustained not by food or drink, but by the glory of the Lord. In his hands he carried once again 2 tablets of stone, freshly inscribed by the finger of God. Upon them were written the 10 Commandments, the eternal covenant between God and his people. As he descended, the people looked up from their camp, weary from the memory of their rebellion, yet hopeful for renewal. But when Moses came near, they drew back in awe, for his face shone with a radiant light. The skin of his face glowed with the brilliance of God's glory, a reflection of the time he had spent in his presence. Aaron and the children of Israel were afraid to come near him, for they could not bear the sight. Moses called to them, and little by little they drew close. He gave them all the commandments that the Lord had spoken with him on Mount Sinai. When he finished speaking, he placed a veil over his face, covering the brightness so that the people could stand in his presence without fear. Yet whenever he went into the tent of meeting to speak with the Lord, he would remove the veil, and when he came out again, his face would shine, testifying that he had been with the living God. The covenant had been renewed. Though Israel had fallen into sin, God's mercy had not failed. Though they had broken faith, God had bound them again to himself. The commandments, written in stone, would stand as a witness among them, guiding their steps, shaping their lives, and teaching them what it meant to live as the chosen people of the Lord. The people began to work together in obedience. They brought offerings for the tabernacle, each giving as his heart stirred. Skilled workers crafted the ark, the altar, and the lampstand. Priestly garments were woven with care. The dwelling place of God was built in the midst of the camp, so that his presence would no longer rest upon a distant mountain, but among his people. From that day forward, Israel carried the law with them. The 10 Commandments became more than words. They were the very foundation of their identity. Each time they remembered Sinai, they remembered the thunder and the fire, the cloud and the trembling earth. They remembered the voice of the Lord, holy and powerful, calling them to worship him alone, to honor his name, to walk in justice and truth, and to live in love toward one another. Generations would pass, but the memory of Sinai would remain. Prophets would remind the people of the covenant. Kings would be measured against it, and every Israelite child would be taught its words. Though the people would stumble again and again, God's commandments stood firm, a light for their path, a reminder of the God who had redeemed them from slavery and called them his own. Moses himself would not enter the promised land, yet he left his people with a treasure far greater than land or riches. He left them the covenant, sealed not only in stone but in the faithfulness of God. The 10 Commandments at Sinai were not just for one generation. They were for all who would follow the Lord, all who would walk in his ways. In every word carved into those tablets was the heartbeat of a holy God calling his people into fellowship with him. And so, the story of Sinai was more than thunder and fire, more than law and command. It was the story of a God who loved his people enough to show them how to live, who bound himself to them in covenant mercy, and who made his glory dwell among them.